following a closure yesterday for a COVID-19 instance. The strange thing is that we had the long weekend, and then on Sunday evening, on Monday evening, we received notification to say that they would be closed on Tuesday, which was quite strange. But be that as it may, it is safe and sorry.
Stranger things have happened.
Indeed, strange things happen all the time. I must say, so quite unusual.
Good morning to everybody that joined us for this, our first training session of the year. My guest speaker that's going to entertain you with his knowledge is Carl Nell. He is from CN Valuers. Carl is a professional valuator with more than 30 years experience in residential, commercial, industrial, farm valuations, and specializes in properties throughout South Africa. That includes Namibia and Lesotho as well. He has 5 years municipal experience and also 5 years full-time as a valuator at a financial institution. Since January 2000, he is active in his own private valuation business, where he did valuation, contract work for various financial institutions and for private clients. He is registered with the Council of Valuers and has a 3-year national diploma for property valuation. So thank you for your time once again. Next to me, some of you may know Multiprof. And then a quick word on our director, conveyancer, attorney, Denver Frockham from our Cape Town office, quickly popped in. He's currently at the Deeds office now. Thank you, Denver, for quickly showing your face.
Thank you, Lizelle, and thank you to both our guest speakers. Appreciating coming on board today, and thank you to all the participants for joining us. May it be a great session. I know it will be.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now you may proceed with your registering of deeds.
Absolutely.
Good luck there. Hi.
Yeah.
Cool, right. Mr. Ready, the floor, the table is yours.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome to post your questions on the chat section, and we will attend to that after the session is finished.
Okay, welcome to everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. We'll speak about comparable market analysis for commercial and industrial properties. Now, let me just go on there. Type of commercial properties. I've been asked to talk about certain aspects, but before elaborating on the points provided to me to cover today, it is important that we define the different type of commercial properties as well. So in the commercial property range, there are typical shopping centers, office blocks, and even blocks of flats that that are not sectionalized yet and is to offer as an entity. Then industrial properties include warehouses, storage areas, workshops with office component situated usually between other industrial properties. Some industrial properties or developments are registered under sectional title properties. Then your specialized properties, including petrol filling stations, hotels, guest houses, and properties that cater for venues. Other properties include private schools and preschools, only catering for a specific market, and properties with consent use also fall in this category. Abattoirs is also a specialized property. And then your agricultural land and different type of farms, such as irrigation farms and just grazing farms, and there's also a category of farms involved. Now, depending on the type of property you must value and what is your instruction, the methods will differ. The example here is a market value or insurance or replacement value, depending what the client wants from you. So I just want to make it clear that this session is not to train somebody to become a a valuer for commercial properties. This is a long period and I need a lot of time. And myself, just for instance, that I can mention for you, when I started at the municipality many years ago, we had a 5-year, or you have to do apprentice work as a valuer in training before you and finish your studies. And those times you work with different valuers on different areas and also with town planning very closely to get knowledge and experience before entering the market where you actually can do a commercial valuation on your own. I just want to get back to the shopping centers. Also there you're getting categories, and I will later on mention shopping centers under stress, and I specifically refer to super regional shopping centers, and these centers are 100,000 square meter or larger. Okay, the demand for commercial properties pre and post COVID. Now I know there's a lot of speculations in the market that COVID was the result of pressure, markets under pressure, especially in the commercial property line, but that is not true. Pre-COVID, there was a lot of warning lights shining actually years before in the commercial property line. And the example that I want to use is Edcon Group. January 2019, the news was that Edcon shut a 2-floor Edcon store of just below 6,000 square meters in a popular Rosebank mall. During 2019, also pre-COVID, about 150 underperformed Jet Edcos and CNA stores were closed to save the company after 2.7 billion rand bailout by the Public Investment Corporation. So there was already red lights shining for the commercial industry long before COVID. So COVID just enhanced that very with a turbo. It became very serious after that. For instance, Sandton office accommodation, prior to COVID, there were already more than 1 million square meters of unoccupied office accommodation, and still new developments were started. Sympathy there for the developers. We should remember that it's not a short-term thing to start a shopping center or an office block, that there are years involved, and Aubrey will know the town planning, how long it will take to rezone and get and demolish the buildings and have everything ready to start building. That's just not, so people just before the COVID that started that, and now during the COVID process they have to finish it. So it put actually more stress on the market than, so it's not going to get better soon, in my view. Okay, some sources indicated a vacancy in the Sandton area of 20%, but other property specialists in the area indicated the percentage vacancy can be as high as 33%. And this was a news that I've heard this on a certain, I can't exactly remember the person that mentioned this. According to SAPOA, Rosebank in particular has seen vacancy rate spikes with an additional 10% the final quarter of 2019 to reach 17.9% of vacant office accommodation. So this was all pre-COVID. In February 2020, just before the lockdown, nearly 20% of offices in Rosebank and parts of Durban were unoccupied. Hatfield and Hillcrest Node in Pretoria with above 20% office vacancies for the first time since 1994. Now, Tshwane CBD, according to statistics, they only mention an 8% vacancy on office accommodation, but we should be more realistic here. If you look at the many government officials and buildings there, and the overboard of working people actually within the government, that's old news already. I figure, that vacancy factor should at least double or triple. And I want to get back to Hatfield, which is a more popular node than the CBD, and the stats on the Hatfield is already 20%. So let's just give you an example there. Post-COVID, further challenges which we are aware of during the last time, period, demand plunges for especially, again, office accommodation, but also retail space is a massive concern when tenants vacate the premises. And I specifically want to mention here regional centre and the Mall of Africa, which is a landmark for shopping centres in South Africa. This morning there was on MoneyWeb, a reading that indicate that they have taken a loss of 1 billion rand on that shopping centre already. So to make it worse, that shopping centre was completed in 2016. So if shopping centres that size, they will always try and for a 5-year lease agreement. That's for them a safe period. And there's escalations obviously during that 5 years. So the rentals were actually above the market trend. And with the new lease agreements that came in now, the owners don't have a lot of negotiation room there because the deduction on rentals all over South Africa on these centres and all these contracts needs to be, or a great majority of these contracts needs to be renewed now at present. So previous belief systems that you do have to work at an office is not a mainstream belief anymore. And I agree, there are certain office spaces where an office will also always be needed. And I can just mention here, for instance, transfer attorneys. It's much easier to work under one roof, and there's everyone is together, and if there's a problem, it's close where to phone people at home and so. So there will always be a need for that. But the previous demand for that, it will never get back to where people think it was normally on. My personal views are, it's even residential properties, which is not the topic today, larger residential properties with office space, that will become more and more popular. And I even think new developments where the market is for small, very luxurious units, I think the new developments will have make a little space additional for where you can have your Zoom meeting, especially when it's a couple and you need places like that. Yeah. So that is the future for me. I think.
Yeah, perhaps just on that point, I can perhaps just add that I think there's a future for co-working that would, as you described, where people will not have their own offices as they have now with all personnel, sitting in the office. But you will have a space that you can rent for the period that you need it for a boardroom plus a reception. But the bulk of work will be done from home, and only a very small percentage of people will be in the office. So the demand for offices, especially for your bigger companies, will be drastically less than it is now. And that would obviously lead to a bigger oversupply. And the developers or owners will have to look at alternative use for these huge office blocks. The first thing that comes to mind is converting them into residential units. But then again, all buildings are not really designed in a way where it is easy to convert. So there might be high costs, and that will have a negative effect, obviously, on the whole on the value of those buildings.
Yeah. And I've seen in Sandton, even during COVID, or just after COVID, some developers started, or owners started immediately with that. That is a little bit late on
that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, but the problem I want to ask you, Aubrey, is I've never seen a study, where we have office for sewage, the whole, can I say, the infrastructure for sewage, for instance, on an office block is much less under pressure, or the pipes, everything is, you don't have to have a certain, according to regulations, certain pipes. Now, if there's all of a sudden 500 people sleeping over in that previous office now accommodation, what will be the complications there? That nobody's talked about that, and I think this is a concern for me as well.
Okay. I think from a town planning point of view, we will have to have a look at the existing zoning of the property. Now, some zonings where offices have been erected have residential as a primary right. So that means that you only need to submit building plans to make those changes. And council will not be in a position to charge any development fees or whatever on them. And that will then obviously move the problem to the suburb away from the owner of the building. But again, nobody would like to buy or rent into a residential complex where you permanently have problems with your sewerage. In other cases where the zoning needs to be changed, of course, then council will insist on development contributions, and that contributions can be used and should be used to upgrade the systems that would not cope. That is in the ideal world. In real life, it's more complicated like that. So I agree with you that it's not that easy to just say we're going to convert the office building into a sectional title living or whatever. But that's a new challenge that we face now, and as time goes along, we'll
see what's happening there.
Okay.
Because there will be oversupply in residential properties as well, and the older buildings, B-grade buildings, they are not that popular in Sandton as an A-grade building. So these owners may decide to downscale a little bit on the internal finishes to get a new market. Yeah. And then other people will be unhappy because it's an upmarket area. So I could see, there will still be a couple of negotiations and uncomfortable negotiations going on there. But this is the reality there. Okay, the people spreading the word that eventually office workers will all return to the offices, and I mentioned here all, because a lot of them saying now that people will get lonely at work or at home and things like that. I don't think living in a COVID already for a year, people do have the need to speak to people, but it's not justified that you have to go back to the office, and it will have a huge impact on our already overloaded roads and traffic and things like that. Okay, so either protect their stake in the building, and according to me, people that pronounce that as a fact. Certain people will come back, as we mentioned. Okay, there will always be office accommodation necessary. And then business owners facing tough times, and many have to cut costs just to survive. Office rent will be high on the priority list to cut, as during lockdown, many office workers within a certain job category prove that corporate offices are not always necessary. So there's a couple of challenges still coming there. Okay, solutions. And me and Aubrey just mentioned already. Converting to residential areas. The previous numbers of square meters are not necessary, as mentioned, and to balance that out will take years if there is a growing economy. So we can't leave politics out of this as well. We know how difficult it is for people if there's not a growth, and then when there's oversupply in certain areas, then it's a little bit of a darker picture. Guest house owners were noted to rent fully furnished accommodation out on a monthly basis. I've noted this on advertising as well here, especially in Brooklyn, this area where your office is situated, upper class area, for short-term periods. So it's a month or 2 months rental agreement, and especially for people that work further away and doing contract work, I think it's ideal for them, and it's fully furnished, and it's a lock up and go type of style. So I think a lot of guest houses will enter that market. And then for the estate agents, I just want to mention, guest house is a specialized property, and it's a difficult thing to value. And we always have to look at how the financial institution look at that property and how they value that property. I've seen advertising here, beautiful guest house, 5-bedroom, and it's beautiful garden pictures, and then price 4 million rand. but there's no way, how do they get to that 4 million? And that is residential estate agents that are taking on commercial properties. And I want to warn them, this is very, very dangerous. If you've got a good name you build up over the years, one such a property can sort of floor you, and you'll have a poor reputation on this. I can just mention quickly maybe how that it's valued in a nutshell. You're looking at the accommodation as a category, beverages and food, and liquor. Those three in different categories, and the bank are looking at to take a percentage of that income from financial statements to derive to per annum income, a net income. And that percentage already include then all the expenses that they say, if it's running good, and they will protect obviously their interest or risk in that property, and they consider guest houses as high risk. And especially now with COVID, where we don't have financial statements, so a lot of guest houses will start entering the market for people that don't have or just lose interest in that. And the estate agents have to be very careful taking these things up and try and, because the zoning is still industrial. If it's got the characteristics of a residential property, and then if the highest value is as a residential, then I can sell it as a residential rather, and the rezoning has to be done. Aubrey, I don't know if your input here to say something.
Yes, on that point, I would just like to give some feedback from experience from Multiprof's offices, where we often deal with properties that have been used for a specific activity, for instance, guest houses, but it was not done in a legal way. So often somebody will start a guest house with one room, adding another, and eventually it is a full-fledged guest house, but the zoning have never been rectified, or no consent was ever given for it. And if a property practitioner will offer that to a buyer as a guest house, for instance, it is misleading, because at some stage the owner will have to go through the whole process of obtaining permission or rezoning, and that process can cost you 200,000 or 300,000 rand, and it may not even be that council will support it. So it's important, if you deal with any commercial property, to make sure that it's a legal commercial property. The same happened for dwelling houses that is used for offices or for fitness centers, any of those, anything that is not residential. We must first make sure, by obtaining a certificate from council, of a zoning certificate, basically, seeing what is legally allowed on the property. Sometimes we also have activity that was legal as a home undertaking, meaning the owner lives there, but now he's selling it, and the new owner assumed that he can use the whole property for his new activity, not understanding that it was a limited use because the owner lived on the property. So it's always advisable, when you deal with a commercial property or any residential property that have a commercial component to it, speak to us and let's advise you what is legal, what can be done in future. Otherwise, the valuation that is attached to it, if you don't understand the zoning restrictions, might not be correct.
Yeah, that's very important.
Okay.
And then obviously prices, fees that people ask of listen, that certain valuers also mention, listen, this is what I'm getting and I'm working on this. Those valuers will usually ask a cheaper price, because you can't just work on figures and believe it's right. I'm specifically talking now on a guest house that I've done near a hospital. So it was that 9 rooms there as well as a little flat lit. But the manager was living in a flat lit. But there were 2 rooms more than according to what was a zoning certificate or the consent that they got on that specific guest house. And then they're going to say, no, but he's sleeping there sometimes or whatever. But when we've got the financial statements and going through there, I've seen that they've indicated all the rooms there and the income of all the rooms. So you're talking about now already a 30% confusion on the real income and what they project. So your property may be up to 30% valued higher, and that is still a negative, obviously, to the purchaser. And purchasers can actually take you on that. So that is a dangerous part. A valuer has to look at all those components, because you have to take responsibility for that valuation, where estate agents do not have to take responsibility. And sometimes those zoning certificate is a one page and it reads easily, and you can say, okay, now I know everything. But sometimes they say, read this in
conjunction with
and then you look at the street council and it's a pack as thick as a Bible, so it's really confusing and it's difficult. And
it's advisable to get professional help with that. Just the interesting thing that we often find is that, for instance, a guest house only have permission for 6 rooms, but when council arrive, they say, well, no, we only use 6 rooms. And then council would just go to the website. And on the website, you advertise 9 rooms. So just make sure that what the zoning or the consent use allow you is the same as you advertise on your website. Websites can be very handy, but it also can count against you if council want to prove that you are not doing what you are allowed to do.
Yeah, and prices as well.
Yes.
Then it has to look at the grade of the guest house and also see what other comparable guest houses in the area, what are their rates, and you also have to determine an occupancy percentage there, which can indicate it's a red light or it's quite a good business, and purchasers should know that. And if you advertise a guest house and sell a guest house, you need to have all that information 100% correct to provide to the purchaser to give it the correct information and good services. Okay, how do demand and supply influence the price? I think this is obviously, everyone knows that the bigger the supply is, the lower, and with the low demand, then obviously we've got problems. Just a figure here, office accommodation at present in South Africa, there's a 2,400,000 square meters vacant office accommodation in South Africa, and that contributes to 13.3% of all offices. More than double what was considered healthy. And this is also the highest in 70 years. So previously I've talked about Hatfield and those areas with the 20%, but the average, taking everything in South Africa, is 30.3%. And we should remember the places that don't have a huge growth, smaller towns, for instance, they won't be affected that much. It's a bigger nodes, and where the things were going fast and moving, like Sandton is well known throughout South Africa as the business node of South Africa. So this is a huge problem. The full impact is continuously influencing the value of commercial properties in a negative way. Oversupply leads to a lower rent and a higher capitalization rate, and influencing the commercial property in a negative way. How do you determine the price of a commercial property? And as mentioned, I'm not going in here to do a valuation session. If I do a course on valuations, it will be a course that will go over a couple of months just to cover the basics. So it is complicated depending on the type of property, as mentioned previously. Office accommodation, market, you take the market-related income per annum, deduct all expenditures, its rates, taxes, operational costs, insurance, maintenance, security, etc. And specifically that operational cost, in the lease agreement, they will tell you what is that contribution, and sometimes it is even to cover I've seen contracts that even cover the physical rates and taxes, which actually is for the owner, but some contracts even so in the market you can't say, listen, this building looks the same as this one, the average rate per square meter is 160, so I'm going to use it here. You have to know what operating cost is included or excluded, and secondly, if they're talking about the net square meters or the cross, the staircases and everything, so the contracts will lead you to a more clear view on that, and that can make a huge difference as well. Okay, then you get derive that whole thing to a net annual income, and you applicable the cap rate applicable for that property. And I know you can get cap rates for, say, instance, the note for offices in Sandton is this. It also depends on the building. It can also differ substantially what is depending on the condition and everything of the property. I've already mentioned the guest houses. I think me and Aubrey just had a look through there. Okay, and that is the whole thing. Aubrey, I want to ask you just one question. Yes. Something landed on my table now yesterday. It's a shopping center not in Gauteng, it's actually KwaZulu-Natal. The shopping center is approximately 7,500 square meters, and the parking requirement there is 1 per 25 square meters. Okay. But say for instance, I'm just taking there should be, say for instance, 300 parking facilities, and there is only 170. The building plans are approved, the occupational certificate is in place. What will you say is the next step? Because if there's no area to expand, then you've got a problem, or the purchaser has a problem.
Okay. Without having more information about it, the first thought would be that there was some corruption in the approval of those plans, because all building plans approval is depending on the site development plan, and the site development plan is approved according to the zoning. So if there's a parking requirement of 4 per 100 and the 1 per 25, building plan should not have been approved. So firstly, and that's again, unfortunately, we have some corruption in some of the municipalities, and these things happen. And people think if you can just get away with it, it's okay. The problem is that once it can be proven that anything, a building plan was approved contrary to any of the conditions that's legal, those plans basically can become null and void. So the worst case scenario is that some of the shopping center need to be demolished to fit into the parking lanes. Obviously, that would be a last resort option if nothing else can be negotiated with council. It may be possible that council will be willing to accommodate changes within rezoning to lower the parking requirements. They will insist on a transport report or transport engineering report stating what is the real need for parking there. It might be that it's in an area where people arrive by taxi mostly, and half of the even limited parking bays are not used at all. So by having a look at the situation, but if people park all over in the street and on the pavements and whatever, then council might say, listen, the plans was approved illegally. You need to submit building plans that might include removing some of the structures.
Yeah, and actually a valuer should pick that up because it's extremely important. So if a valuer look at the approved plans and say, listen, tick off and then move on, you can do the job in a very short time period and ask a cheap fee for that, or a cheaper fee for that. But if you're going deep in doing a proper due diligence, and there's certain aspects of the due diligence that I hand over to somebody else, a guy that's brilliant in that, so more than financial line, and going through the contracts if there's a problem with the contracts. Yes. And as mentioned, then obviously, when there's a town planning dispute or a thing like this, and to take forward, then a person or a group like Multiprof will come in. So actually, to do a proper job, in some cases you need 3 different expertise, to complete their job in, to the full, or to the benefit of the purchase that's the purchaser.
Yeah, my opinion is that all of these things is a process of connecting the dots between all the different professionals, and therefore we specialize in trying to involve as many of the professionals to get the best solution from all the different views. I see we have some questions there. Perhaps we can go through some of the questions and just answer them.
There's a question from Gerard van Dijk. How would one do evaluation of a vacant site earmarked for a service station, but not yet zoned for it? It will be a subdivision from an earth on which a retail center is being developed.
Yeah, it's a difficult one to just say exactly this is what you should do. Like I already just mentioned, you need to have all the facts. I have to go and look at the site, and obviously the valuation cannot be based if all those, or it will be evaluation subject to the rezoning that must be in place. For petrol filling stations, for instance, these guys like Engine, if they open a new service station, they're doing a research if it's going to be profitable and things like that. So the valuer has to speak to those guys on that specific site and find out what is the whole background. But to put a value just on a vacant land that's earmarked for that, if a petrol company is not willing to develop there, then that site is not worth what it would have been if you've got the papers that the petroleum company will develop there. Yeah. So it's a catch-22 there. It's a difficult one, and personally, I will not even go for that, because that thing will lay on my table most probably for a year or even longer. Yeah. It's not even worth it.
Perhaps I can just there a word of warning that just to collaborate what you're saying. A rezoning for a service station is one of the more complicated rezonings, and there's no guarantee that that will be approved. There's issues like environmental, that there's a lot of things that needs to be done, and there is a few service stations that was built before these was commissioned, and most of them is not operational, or they are was half built. I know of one here in Silver Lakes that have been there for years because it was preempted that there will be an approval for the service station. So it is very dangerous to deal with the property, especially for a service station, but for that matter, almost for any use, until you have the rights. Because what do you do if you put a value to it and there's some problem with the environmental, the level of the water table or things like that, and suddenly you can't get that zoning done. I mean, you put your buyer at risk by attaching a value to something that doesn't exist and maybe never can exist.
Specifically also indicate now, or thinking about that Molotu Road there's a lot of petrol garages that first part out there, and somebody actually asked me about 2 years ago on if I can do a valuation on also a property that's earmarked, a plot there, and when I've seen all the petrol garages there, even if it's earmarked there, with the amount of already existing petrol filling stations there, I don't think any petrol company will go in for. So if you, as an estate agent, sell that property that's been earmarked to your client, that guy has to pay a certain amount, and most probably he's going to wait 3 years, and then that's actually no. Yes. So he's not going to be fond of you.
Council also have certain requirements. For instance, the distance between filling stations on a specific side of the road. So it is just without a very proper investigation, one might be able to say, listen, there is a 70% or 80% chance that these rights will be permitted. And if a buyer then wants to take that risk, but you must make the buyer aware of the fact that he is taking a risk by buying a property. And in this case specifically, where you first need to subdivide, even the subdivision can be problematic. So it's just a dangerous thing to attach a value to if you don't have done very proper due diligence on it.
Okay, so there's another question. Colin, thank you. Can one use a direct sales comparison from historical sales in the area, let's say Tshwane, to value a hotel as a specialized commercial property?
No, you can't do that. But what you can do is, if you already have the valuation done based on that income of that hotel, like I mentioned with the guest house, it's very much similar, the same principles that you would use. But then you can do an additional, just a checkup to say this hotel, if you say, for instance, your value came out to 6 million rand for the hotel, and you do a base value on a comparable sale that was 5.5. That is just an easy for the financial institutions to see there was a hotel selling for that price. But you know, those type of properties, the value is so much in how the property is being or managed. You know, that's it. You know, if it's fully managed and you've got a poor policy there, and you get some elements in there, a block away, the other hotel can be looking the same but have twice the value if you're looking at the financial statements. So it's, you can't do that.
Kevin and Zainu, sorry, if it's possible, could you please have training or basic information on steps taken to apply for rezoning and which department handles this? That's a good topic.
Yes, that we can assist you with gladly. So if there's a need for it, we can arrange a specific training session for that. So we will gladly assist you with that. You must just tell us when, where, and how, and we will gladly do that.
Great. And then Wendy, what's a good tool to determine the cap rates?
You know what? First of all, if you look at the Rudy report, you can get a background more or less what it is, and they're doing very good research. But there are a lot of other things to take in consideration. For instance, you get two properties next to each other, they look more or less the same from the outside, but the one is well maintained throughout the years and the other one not. So your figures will look totally different, and your risk is higher. So the higher the risk, you know, the higher your cap rate will be and the lower your value will be. So it's everyone is, and there are too many components to look at just to have a bold figure. It's not a good thing to do that if you haven't got the knowledge and actually go further than just you know, that area in specific. Yeah. You may not have enough sales in that area or whatever, but if you know exactly that what property that's been sold, and you have got the lease agreements and the income on that, then you can work more or less an expenditure out similar than yours. Like I said, it won't be same depending on the condition. And then if you've got the sale price of the other one, then you can do a back reverse maths to determine the cap rate on the other property, and you can use that most probably more safely or adjust depending on the condition of your own property that you will manage.
Carl, perhaps just for some of the viewers, can you just explain what a cap rate is? I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with the term.
The cap rate, you know, the definition. Well, the cap rate is actually a risk of the income. If you got already the income per annum, the cap rate, the higher the cap rate is. For instance, if your income is 100,000 and your cap rate is 10%, then your value will be higher than when the cap rate is, for instance, 12%. So 2 years ago, the regional centers, they were still 3 years ago, they were selling for 6.5%, 7% to 7.5% cap rate, and today it's a total different ballgame. So it's you know, there's too many components. Can I say influencing the cap rate? It's a nice tool to have to say the cap rate on average on this area is that, but the next year, say for instance in this year, a lot of properties that was not well managed or maintained, then obviously the cap rate will be higher than the next 6 months period where you've got sales that all the properties were in impeccable condition. So it will indicate the cap rate is lower. But in fact, is it lower? It depends on your property that you do the valuation on.
Okay, so what I hear is if you're not an expert, don't try to deal with cap rates.
Yeah, no, you know what, if I do a course on commercial properties, then it's on the situation, then I can explain it, you know,
Yes,
and there's a lot of working out and things, and I don't want to take it out of my head to make a mistake and then somebody writes it down. So it's
I think this is a very important question to especially agents doing commercial is one question. What must I ask for when I do list a commercial property, anticipating of a formal evaluation for the property? What must you ask? It's different residential wise than commercial wise.
That's it. I will tell an estate agent like that to rather work with a commercial estate agent that's got knowledge, and for a year or 2 years work with that person and get all the details there, because there's a list of things that you need to get. But if I can just summarize the most important one, you know, you need to have a tenancy schedule. So a tenancy schedule will tell you these are the tenants within the commercial property, and this is when the lease agreement started, that's where the lease agreement ends, and there's a 6% or 7% escalation. So that will differ throughout, and then you can see if there are longer terms or longer term lease agreements. For a 5-year lease agreement, the bank feels happy about that because they know the guy, you know, committed for that. But if you've got 5-year lease agreements on the majority and they're all expiring now in the next 6 months, then obviously that's also a good example. Then your cap rate will be much higher, where the lease agreements are more on a longer term period. So it is important to look at that, and then, like I said, that's maybe the difference between a good valuer and a valuer that just accepts everything. You can, not all the tenants will tell you, if you tell them, listen, I'm sitting here, I'm doing a valuation, I've noticed you paying this amount, is it true, whatever. Some tenants just tell you, listen, who the hell are you, get out here. But some guys are very, you know, if they know the reason why you're doing that, and sometimes you see that or you're asking for the invoice, if they say different, you look at it and it's different from the tenancy schedule. So those are things, then usually in that circumstances, then I'm also ordered to give me a letter that this is the income, and or I walk away from it, which I've also done previous to the huge commercial properties, you know, withdraw my evaluations from such a project. Those things do happen. So there are too many holes that you can fall in, and you can get nailed, and you also can have financial liabilities from people that put claims in against you. So lease agreements is very important, and like I said, if you do a proper due diligence, then I mean to work through 100 lease agreements, you have to read through those lease agreements, and not all are the same, because say for instance another company did the management there, and it was purchased by another group, and now they want to implement from their lease agreements. There are different type of lease agreements, so you can have a huge variety of lease agreements, and to go through that lease agreement and to see if they're asking the right or the correct price, you know, sometimes there is also some huge discrepancies that's happening there, and then obviously your anchor tenant, like the spa or those guys, they're paying less than other people. And sometimes you see in the building that close to the entrance, those small shops will pay more, or they're supposed to pay more. And when I look at the tenancy schedule, I specifically go there and look if this guy that's paying more is in that area, because sometimes he's right to the corner and hasn't got anything. But through escalations over the years, his lease agreement is actually so much inflated. You know, so it's a huge, can I say, management thing to run a property or a shopping center to the best. But then, you know, also you need to have the insurance on that, to have a real insurance on that. And then you have to work out if that insurance is sort of sufficient, if that building if something happens to the building. So you have to do a cost on the building cost on these things, and work out if the property is, for instance, there's more maintenance needed. Then your formula that you work out that whole match to get out to see if the property is valued or insurance value is correct. So that can take you the best part of a day to get all that information and do that, and then you haven't got anything to do with the valuation. It's just due diligence for the purchaser. So I prefer to work with purchasers, with a due diligence team, and tell the guy, listen, this is what's happening, this is a problem here, and you should offer less and things like that, than to work for the seller, because sometimes the seller wants you to put a value on the figures that he has, and if I find out one of those figures or a percentage of those figures are not right, then what do? You've already invested a week or 2 or 3 weeks work into that, and now you're going to tell the guy, listen, I think I have to give you the correct things, and you'll speak to the auditor to give get a letter from their side, and then the relationship is not up to, and you can't, it's better to get payment. So it's for me a huge risk to do a big commercial.
I think from our side, I can just perhaps add, as part of the due diligence, it always starts with the zoning certificate.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need to know what you are allowed to do there, and the fact that some industry had been on the premises for years doesn't mean that it's legal. So firstly, you start with the zoning certificate. You obviously get a copy of your surveyor general diagram, because we have found in cases where some property, some park next door, or some servitude areas have been incorporated in this on this stand, and you think you buy this big stand with all these parking areas, and some of them might not even belong to you. Then, of course, very important, building plans and up-to-date building plans. We often find that building plans might be available, but in the meantime, a mezzanine floor has been added, and that can cause some restrictions as far as fire is concerned. The extensions have been made, carports have been erected, and you assume that they are legal, and they're not. And then, of course, the ideal way to check on that is to always insist on a certificate of occupancy. Then you know you have a legal building. You know everybody have signed off on it. It's fire safe. There's no additions that have not been approved. So the documentation is available to make it much easier. But of course, the owner, and if you work for the seller, he don't really want you to investigate those type of things. And that put the value at risk, and therefore the ideal is for the valuer to work with a team, so that you know that your buyer is paying the right price, or the value is the right price, and it's not what the seller think it is, the value is.
And maybe just a last point here on the valuation side. You get some, say for instance, there are 5 tenants there. One is owner occupied, and the other 4 is a tenant.
Yes.
I've noted that especially the government contracts, they are inflated far, above the rentals per square meters that is actually market related. So that means, and you always have to bring it down to the market related rental. If it's a little bit over, then you can work with the cap rate, put the cap rate a little bit higher to say the rental is maybe 7 or 8% higher. So there are ways to get to the value that's most properly that's a fair value in the open market. But these things, I've done work in Kimberley where the financial institution actually told me now that the value that they've got good contracts, and I said yes, but they inflated with like 35 to 40%. So I don't want to take that risk. Then the credit guy at the financial institution should take the risk. So that makes the value doesn't, you don't have a lot of friends,
Yes.
Now, so any other questions? Please raise your hand. Okay then, thank you so much for this very informative session. You did see that you got the details from the presentation. If you did not get it, just quickly pop me an email and I will give those details to you. And Denver, I think if you could quickly like to say something before we say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Aubrey. That was absolutely insightful. Appreciate your time and taking us through those various perspectives. There's a road for recovery for commercial property over this next little while, and we've already just got to do our best and support each other in every way that we can. But thank you. That was really, really insightful, and I think our participants will agree with me on that. And thank you, Lizelle, for organizing our session today. Really appreciate it. Very well done.
Thank you for all.
Thank you very much.
Have a
Thanks a lot.
lovely day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.